Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Terence Ray, and welcome to News Café. News Café is our third edition of the year, and tonight we have a very, very special guest, my good friend, my longtime good friend, Mr. William Marlin. Mr. William Marlin is joining us tonight, ladies and gentlemen, and he is here to talk about the latest developments post-election. Mr. William Marlin has been a long-time follower of my news and a fervent reader, and he will definitely confirm that tonight. Welcome, Mr. William Marlin. Welcome to our show, News Café. Good to have you.
Good evening, Terence. It's always a pleasure, to have a conversation with you. And it's a pleasure to be your third guest on your new program. I want to congratulate you actually with starting it. You never seem to have a dull day. For you, it has been always, if this ain't working, open up that one. If that one ain't working, shut it down and get something else going. But there is also always something new with you.
Absolutely. Well, I'm a serial entrepreneur. So if I try 10 things and 8 fail, there's always a good chance that 1 or 2 might be a success. And over the years, I've had a number of those little successes. I've had many failures, of course, but some of those little successes are still going strong. So indeed, with News Café is one of our new ventures. And indeed, you are, as our third guest, you are here to tell us a little bit about yourself. In short, you just recently had a farewell speech in Parliament in honor of your retirement from politics. And that gives us a good reason to have you on the show, because you are, with your long years, and you can tell us exactly how many years that is, in politics here in St. Martin, you are more or less not only a statesman, but an expert in St. Martin politics. So tonight, I want to talk about the position of the Prime Minister, what is the function exactly, what it entails, and also we want to talk about the screening process, which is right now a hot topic in the post-election period, as indeed a number of candidate ministers' names have been submitted for screening, and we are anxiously awaiting to hear the results of that screening process and to find out who has passed the screening, and then we will know who will be our next incoming ministers in our new cabinet of government. So even today, people ask me, and you hear anything, any breaking news yet? So, unfortunately, I said, they're very tight-lipped, and rightfully so. But you being, as a retired statesman now in terms of politics, first of all, tell us how many years you have served in St. Martin politics.
Well, Terence, we started the political party in 1978, December 15th, 1978, a day I would never forget. It's the birthday of our first Island Council lady, Elaine Gums-Vaughn. She was one of the founding members, and she went on to be one of the, first persons to be elected with the party. Well, the first female. The first two to be
Right.
elected were Vance James Jr., the late Vance James Jr., and Vincent Duncher.
Oh, yeah.
Then it was Vance and Elaine, and then Vance and myself.
Right.
And that tag team stayed for a while until it was expanded. So in 1979, 78, the party started. They contested their first election in 1979. I got elected in 1987. And ever since I got elected in 1987, I remained an elected official, being elected in every election after that until I retired from the political arena. I made it known in 2014 that in 2018 I was going to turn over the leadership,
Right.
because then it would have been 40 years since we had started the party. Then in 2020, I said this was my last election, which it became, out of, well, not out of nowhere, but without prior notice. My son one day threw his hat in the ring. He had made it known in 2022 that he was interested in running, and
Right.
he started preparing himself, which resulted in him winning a seat in his first run. So, I'm happy for him, and I'm sure he will do a great job. As he said, he wants to carry on the legacy,
The
and I
legacy,
told
yes.
him he needs to um, have some big shoes. His foot needs to grow a bit more because the shoes are a bit on the bigger side. But no, I've been in the political arena for many, many years, and I've served also as a member of parliament in the former Netherlands Antilles until our last run, January 2010. And that was a successful closing off of the Antillean era as we won all three seats. There was never before a party, since we had three seats for St. Martin, that won actually all three seats. So that was a good crowning for us as well. I've been
Right.
an island council member in St. Martin. I've been a commissioner, and then when we became country St. Martin, or the constituent state, as it would be officially named, I served as a member of parliament. We won 7 seats in that election in 2010, but we
Right.
were left
September
out of
2010.
government. And in 2012, we were part of a new government that was formed then. I had no interest in being prime minister anymore, so I asked to be minister of Romi.
Right.
And then that lasted 1 year. And then in 2014, as I was to submit the screening report to the governor, We had, for the first time, a governing program was prepared before the government was sworn in. And when I was submitting the screening report, the same day, we got notice that a candidate was no longer supporting the government, followed by another one, and the process had to be halted, and a new government a new coalition took over before the government was even sworn in. And then
That was in 2014, if I may
in
interject.
2014.
Okay.
And
Were
then in
you
2000
then formateur, because you said you had
Yes,
to submit?
I was formateur then. In 2015 again, and then again in 2016. And after the hurricane in 2017, I left office as prime minister, but then I returned as a member of parliament, and I remained a member of parliament. I was chairman of parliament for a short while as well, and first chair of parliament, first vice chair of parliament from 2020 until 2024. And in
Right.
24, I did not contest the election. And
Correct.
I'm now, for the first time in my life, since I started working at age 20, that I am unemployed. So, it's been a long and, if you want to call it, successful run as a teacher, principal, and then politician, prime minister, and now retired.
Well, tomorrow I'm going to put out an article about the fact that ex-ministers and ex-MPs get a generous salary as a sort of pension scheme for a period of 2 years. But because of your retirement age, you do not qualify for that attractive pension.
No, I've never gotten it. Terrence, since you raise it, I think people kind of misunderstand, misconstrue these things. They feel it's like a generous handout to a former office holder. I'm happy that it was actually, let's say, adjusted, but picture yourself. Take someone, a recent example. Minister Anna Labega, Anna Richardson,
Anna Richardson, yes.
Minister Anna Richardson,
our Minister
has
of Justice,
served 4 years as Minister of Justice. Before that, she worked in the private sector.
Correct.
That job is no longer there. So she would have to do two things: find a new job, but also, in the meantime, readjust her style of living, if you want to call it, because sometimes in cases of becoming a minister, some people jump from, let's say, making 7,000 guilders a month to making the salary of a minister, to having a car at your disposal, gas is being paid, and you have, I'm saying, if you compare that to the director of the airport, the director of GBE, the director of the harbor, the director of the central bank, compare that to the director of any one of the commercial banks in St. Martin, okay? Compare
Right.
that to the director of SFV. All of them, most of them rather, or several of them, have a bigger income than a minister, okay? Several of them drive a car that is in a more luxurious, if you want to call it luxurious, because when I was prime minister, I tamed down the cars of ministers to Tucson's, okay? Before that, there was Santa Fe's.
Right.
But the package that a minister gets as his benefits are nowhere to be compared with the benefits a director of any one of the banks, a director of SFV, a director of the airport, harbor, etc., etc., etc. But they are not politicians. But the people who the people elect to run the country and to represent them, um, we tend to want to tear them down because they are ministers or because they are politicians. Now, the redundancy pay or the severance pay for when the minister goes home, Minister Anna Richardson would have to immediately, let's say, start looking for a job. If
Correct,
she
correct.
won, in my case, there is no job for me to get. Did I solve as a, if you want to call it a career politician, then there would have been a pension this size. So you go from being prime minister to first chair of parliament, and because now you retire, you are down to basically zero. And people would say, is that what he's gotten for solving the country? Is that the best we can do? Now, if there was no severance pay, Minister Anna Richardson would have to start hitting the pavement looking for a job because she is not a civil servant. And in my case, when I stepped down as minister in 2017, I had no income. My pension, while I was due for a pension, it was not regulated. I did not have any income. And that lasted for several months until I got elected again. Okay. And I stepped
Mhm.
down November 24th, I think it was. December, I had no income. January, none. February, none. March, none. April is when I got back. I was sworn back in. So all that
Your
time I had,
retirement age, right? That was due to the fact that you had already reached retirement age and was
yes, the
indeed
retirement
entitled to
age,
a regular pension.
the only income I had was the ROV pension.
Right.
So to so the
But anyway,
the transition
we have
the
to.
transition let me finish explain this also.
Uh-huh.
In the past, it had been misused because the intention isn't, let's say, if you have a job, like some people were business people, had a
Right.
business, and they return to their business but continue to collect the redundancy pay
Yep.
while you were a business owner. The idea also is that if you have a job that, let's say, if the minister's salary is 20,000 guilders and he or she goes to a job that is now paying them 11,000 guilders, then the severance pay should regulate the difference between the 20 and the 11
Right.
over a sliding scale. It
Correct.
starts at 100% 1 month, then 90%,
Yep.
after a while to 80%, and then I think
Correct.
that's how it phases out to
It
either
pays
80
out
or
over
70.
2 years,
But
over a
it
period of 2
has
years.
been misused over the years, which prompted Parliament to adjust the term from 4 years, I think it was, to
2 years.
uh, two to 2 years. But it does not mean that the minister will now have to collect for 2 years. The minister, if they serve 4 years, I think collect for 1 year. I'm not sure even if it's two. Okay, but
And
you
for
don't
the
collect your
MPs
full
it is.
salary. You don't collect your full salary, and if you get a job, let's say if the minister was a civil servant, and the civil servant now has to return to their position as a civil servant, and it pays them only 12,000 guilders, then the 8,000 is what will be paid out in a phased
Right.
um, on a phased out scale, and
Correct.
eventually it drops to allow the minister to adjust his or her lifestyle again. I can tell you when I um, was a commissioner for 4 years, but in three different governments. Okay. So it wasn't like this government that sat there for 4 years. I was a commissioner for a period of like 3 years and 10 months, but in three different governments. But during that entire period, I was driving a government uh, vehicle. Meanwhile, someone was using my vehicle, and when I stepped down as commissioner, I actually had no vehicle because of the condition it was left in. So I had to go and buy myself a new vehicle. Um, so that is how sometimes, you need to adjust. Sometimes if a minister is, let's say, renting a house,
Well, anyway,
and
like I said, we might have to touch on that topic another time because indeed, my article about that topic is coming out tomorrow, so you can indeed have a look at it, and then we can always
but I
address that.
hope it's a balance. I hope it's a balanced article.
Oh, no, you know, St. Martin News by now. We're very critical. So indeed, you can consider it a fair or not.
Being critical should look at all the angles of the reality. But let's move on to something else.
At the end of the day, indeed, yeah, if you are, let's say, prime minister, indeed, and you have to step down for whatever reasons, you reach your full term, you did not get reelected, or indeed, your government fall, or whatever, there should be like a little bit of a buffer or cushion to catch you in terms of your finances to readjust to a life post minister, post MP. But let's talk about the prime minister position because that's one of the topics for tonight, the function of the prime minister. As we discussed previously, there's a lot of misconception about the role of the prime minister. We seem to think that, or the perception is that the role of the prime minister is to be the boss over the other ministers in the council of ministers. There's a Latin term, primus inter pares, basically meaning that the prime minister, he or she is equal amongst equals. But the reality of the situation is that, if you have a prime minister who was probably the person who formed the government as a formateur becomes prime minister, is most of the time the person who won the election from the biggest party. So, that political position gives the prime minister a sort of a dominant role. But in reality, especially here in St. Martin, it's not so straightforward. So you've been a number of years serving as prime minister off and on over the years, even with your political experience pre-country St. Martin status. Tell us a little bit about the function of prime minister and what it exactly entails. Is the prime minister the boss of the council of ministers?
No. One of the things, and when we get to, let's say, discussing the screening, it would come up again. Okay. Ministers have ministerial responsibility, meaning the Minister of Education, Culture, Youth, and Sports is the CEO, so to speak, of that ministry. He or she is the boss over that ministry, but of course, not boss being like, this is my house and I will do what I want, because you have
Right.
to operate within the bounds of the law. But
Correct.
the prime minister cannot tell the minister of education, hey, you can't take that decision, or you should not take that decision, or you should not give that subsidy, or you should not approve for that sports delegation to go to the Little League World Series, anything like that.
Right.
That is not how it works. Every minister is responsible for their ministry, including the prime minister. Where it differs is the prime minister chairs the council of ministers meeting, and the prime minister is responsible for making an agenda. And that is where the prime minister has a little more influence. So, if, for instance, you, the minister of education, and there is a piece you would want to go on the agenda, you can't come as a free for all. Every minister comes with his documents under his arm and say, today I want to discuss the subsidy to the baseball association. And another one said, today I want to discuss giving out 10 parcels of land at the ring road to a particular company. Or another one say, well, I want to give out a casino license, or I want to give a landing permit to an airline, and I want to, and I want to. You have to go to or submit whatever you would want handled in the Council of Ministers. So it's not every decision that the minister takes. And that is why I'm saying we will discuss this shortly, because the minister has ministerial responsibility. So if
Right.
I'm Minister of Romi and Terence Ray asked me for a parcel of land, once that parcel of land uh, is not in long lease by anyone, um, I can ask Domain Affairs to ask for Cadastre to prepare a letter of measurement, a made brief, and I can then take a decision and make it known, send the documents to the notary for the notary to. So I give him a resolution that the land is in long lease, and with that he goes to the notary, and then the notary, when the documents are prepared, would invite me to come to sign off on it. And it's registered in the cadastre. Terence Ray has the parcel of land. Now, sometimes people would say, but Prime Minister, how come Terence Ray get a piece of land? I would say, which piece of land? Also, how you could be the Prime Minister, you don't know that Terence Ray got a piece of land up the road. That's I would not know. I would not see it. Or somebody would come and say, Prime Minister, um, I was surely hoping that my son or my daughter would have gotten their scholarship, their study financing, and how you know we'll vote for the party and you leave that slide. And I'm like, it is not something I would know. I would need to find out from the Minister of Education why that has happened. And so you go down the line. So it is not
Right.
every decision that ministers take require a decision in the Council of Ministers, and only those documents that come to the Council of Ministers for decision making, but they have to go through.
Which circumstances does that happen? In which areas or which circumstances does it happen that
When
it comes to the
when
council of ministers for
when the
decision?
expenses exceed the amount of money that a minister can sign off on, when it is a contract binding the
Country?
country, and when it's a law. So the minister can't draft a law and just send it to Parliament. The procedures that those things would have to walk their particular way. But it's not that the prime minister, like you said in the introduction, is the boss of the ministers. The prime minister is just number one in the lineup of ministers. The prime minister represents the Council of Ministers. When there is, let's say, the Council of Ministers needs to be represented. If it is not something that, again, touches the ministerial responsibility of another one. That is why you would see sometimes, or well, all the times, for, let's say, for St. Martin Day, you would see the Minister of
Culture.
Education and Culture speaking, and you would see the Prime Minister also speaking, because then the minister speaks in as the minister who's responsible for the celebration of the holidays and national holidays and things like that. But the Prime Minister speaks then as the
Representative of the
Prime
government.
Minister in their capacity as Prime Minister.
Right.
But what also is conflicting to a lot of people would feel that the Prime Minister is the head of the government. The head of the government is the governor. That's the constitutional head of government. That is why every national ordinance, every national decree, every law, the budget, all of these got to be signed by the governor. So we can pass all the budget we want, but if the governor doesn't sign off on it, it is not into effect. We
Right.
can pass any law in Parliament, but if the governor doesn't sign off on it, it does not happen. And like what is happening now with the police, the function books have been, the function book for the police, for the justice, has been finalized after 13 years. And to that, again, I would like to shout out and say kudos to Minister Anna Richardson for putting her shoulders under it and together with her staff getting it done.
Right.
And that is one of the things that having a stable government in place for 4 years would afford a government to do. And I can imagine the frustration among officers. But the reality is, no, there is the legal basis for the payment to be made, but the payment can't be made because the Minister of Justice goes to a filing cabinet, opens a box of money, and start to pay them. There's a process, a national decree has to be made, and it has to go to the governor.
Yep.
For each justice worker, and there's some over 500 or 600 of them, but for each justice worker, a specific decree has to be drafted and has to be vetted by the governor's cabinet, and then the governor signs off on it. So it is a process that takes longer. It is different than if it was that the minister took a decision to give each justice worker a bonus of 500 guilders, pending the outcome of the payment. Then everybody could have gotten a bonus end of October, end of November, end of December. Even now, for end of January, all of them can get a bonus
Right.
because it is more than sure that everybody's payout, at least those that will be paid out, will receive more than 500 guilders. But to pay out what is owed to them, a resolution, a national decree has to be signed, an LB, a long prescribed, and has to be signed by the governor as well.
Correct. Coming back to the minister's power to sign off on projects at a certain guilder figure, I believe the amount is 150,000 guilders. Anything above that has to either get approved from the Council of Ministers and go to the governor for sign off. And anything below the 150,000 guilders, the minister has the prerogative to sign off on that himself. Is that correct?
No, I think it's capped at 50,000 guilders.
50,000, okay.
And no. But 150 has to do, I think, with capital expenses. So if a minister has to make like a capital investment, let's say the Minister of Education again needs to do some repairs to a school, and it's only 150,000 and under, then the minister can sign off on it because it's considered like a small job. While 150,000 sounds like a lot of money, but in what you're going to get done for it.
Right.
But the minister has a petty cash that he or she can
Tap into.
do small things with. Okay, sometimes you find people come and they're selling, let's say, they're traveling. A sports organization is traveling and they're selling tickets for $10, $15. The minister could buy 10 of them without having to go anywhere to ask permission. It's his discretion. And once he spends that petty cash, it is replenished once he submits receipts. You don't spend it without giving account
Right.
to the finance department. I know, for instance, when I was minister, there were times, one particular time I can recall when the public works department needed those blue lights. The hurricane was coming, and they needed blue lights. I think it was a hurricane of 2017 itself, and they came to me because processing a purchase order was going to take too long, and I asked them how much were the lights. It was $100 something for the one or the two lights, and I took it out the petty cash, gave it to them, and then I submitted as a proof of purchase, a proof of spending from my petty cash. I included it and thing, but it's not for the minister to say, well, I feel like having a lobster thermidor from a Pineapple Pete today, so I'm gonna send my driver down and get me a lobster thermidor. For that, you have a bank card. It's not a credit card. A bank card with a maximum, I think, of 1,000. Is it 1,000 guilders? I think, and you can use that for representation as well. It's like
well, if you're spending your little petty cash as minister, you better make sure invite the prime minister to get some that lunch that you're ordering. But again, coming back to
the prime minister has no control over it either. The petty cash does not have to go through the prime minister. Let's say my staff would make up the overview of how the petty cash would spend. I sign off on it, and it goes to the finance department. Once they find everything is approved, they sign off. They approve it, and then they replenish my petty cash. Can you imagine, for instance?
Well, I was just using it as a joke to lead back into the
receipt
topic of the
that
prime minister.
I bought this jacket out of my petty cash. Then the finance department would say, kindly put it back, or we will take it out your salary, because it's an illegal transaction.
We know many ministers, previous commissioners in Curacao, for instance, got into trouble for using credit cards, spending on jackets and clothes and all kinds of stuff. So, but anyway, I want to come back to the role of the prime minister, because I want to use that as a segue into the next topic, which is the screening process. We now know that, of course, the prime minister is indeed the chair of the Council of Ministers, and with that position gives the prime minister a bit of leeway in terms of determining the agenda for the meetings, and of course the policy setting. We know that the government policies is dictated more or less by a governing accord, which comes out of the process of forming a government with coalition partners. And in that process, when it reaches that stage of formation, a formateur is appointed by the governor, and that formateur most of the times becomes the prime minister. So even in that process, in the formation process, we see the formateur and ought to be prime minister has a leading role. And the screening process in that formation process plays a very big role. And that's exactly what is now happening now. We see, for instance, that the governor has appointed Dr. Luke Messalina of the URSM party. He is the biggest vote getter in that party. That party has taken the lead to form a coalition and a new government. And in that position, he has been appointed by the governor as formateur. So basically now he has a leading role in that process. So I did some research on the screening process, and my findings were the following that I want to read here for our viewers and for yourself, so we can have a little discussion on that. Basically, the screening process is regulated by a national decree. I have found out there's no law in particular that serves as a basis for the screening process here in St. Martin. It is a process that was taken over from the old days of the national, the Nelson Antilles. And in that screening process, there are a number of entities that plays an important role. Namely, to start off in no particular order, we have the SFV, the tax office, the prosecutor's office, and even the Secret Service that we call the VDSM, which is the Veiligheidsdienst St. Martin, which is a Secret Service that also plays a role in that process. But if, for instance, a candidate minister owes SFV, I found out that or a company or their company that they own owes SFV for premium and social taxes, they would have to pay SFV first before they can get a green light in that screening process. The same goes for the tax office. I have found out that if a candidate minister personally owes taxes or his or her company owes taxes, he or she will have to settle with the tax office first. And when I say settle, not a payment arrangement, they have to pay the debt in full, which is very interesting.
No, that is not true.
But we'll come back to that. Furthermore, again, my research, we can beg to differ, but indeed, the prosecutor office also reports on whether a candidate minister has a pending investigation against him or her, if there are any complaints filed against that particular person, if there's any ongoing investigations. That indeed can be a very big red light if that is the case, and the prosecutor's office report that as such. And the same goes for the Secret Service. If the Secret Service, in doing their background check, also come across, let's say, certain skeletons in that candidate minister's closet, and it is actionable in terms of if it can be filed as a complaint or it can be filed as an investigation, the Secret Service has to report that to the prosecutor office, and then they decide whether or not to take action based on that information that has been presented by the Secret Service, and they can indeed choose or decide to take a formal decision to investigate that issue. Across the board, all these entities report to the governor. They report to the governor, and the governor informs the formateur about their findings. And again, the misconception, and that's also, we can debate that, the misconception out there is that the formateur has the last say whether or not a so-called green light for a candidate minister can be turned into a green light, and based on the say of the formateur, that person cannot become a minister or not if the formateur choose otherwise. But again, my research has shown that misconception to be not true. Ultimately, the governor has the last say, because he, as a governor, the governor has to sign off on what we call the Landsbesleit, the national decree, to appoint a candidate as a minister. And the prime minister co-signs that national decree as a counterpart, but ultimately it is the decision of the governor. And if for whatever reason the governor doesn't want to sign off on that candidate minister's appointment, he can send that decision, that national decree, he can send it to the Council of Ministers in the Kingdom for annulment. So, our conclusion would be, based on my findings, that again, we see the role of the governor playing a very important process in the role of screening candidate ministers. We see the role of the governor being influential in that process, and indeed, he has the ultimate say when it comes to appointing candidate ministers. So you had a objection to one of the points. I said indeed that earlier that if a minister owes the tax office, he has to pay that debt in full. I assume you don't agree. So tell us about that.
No, that is not true. There's a difference with owing and have a debt to the tax off to the country. Someone could, let's say, have a business and has not been filing taxes for the last 3 years. So that person has not been living up to his or her responsibilities to the Treasury. We all got to pay our taxes, but it can happen. It can happen that someone owes a huge amount, whatever the reason may be, and therefore they need to make a settlement. Now, if I have a settlement with the tax office, rather with the receiver, because you don't make the settlement with the tax office, you have a settlement with the receiver, and you tell the receiver, okay, I owe 40,000, 50 or 60,000, and I'll pay 5,000 a month for 10 months. Now I might be in my third or my fourth month. The receiver won't come up and say, well, hey, you have 6 more outstanding months, you got to pay them, or else you can't pass the screening, or we will report this. No, you have an agreement and you are living up to your agreement. And the same goes, let's say, for SFV. If a businessman has not paid SFV for the last 5 years, okay, he started a business 5 years ago and has not paid SFV for 5 years. So that person is dodging the bullet and has no intention to pay SFV as long as they can get away with it. So that person is not the kind of person we would want to entrust them with the responsibility of being a minister, where they can sign off. Like some people would, and I would tell them, I say, do you really think as a minister or even the prime minister, I have the keys to the receiver's office and I can go in a chest and take out money? I said, no, that's not how it works. Okay. But when someone has not been paying their dues to the tax man, then they are not living up to their responsibilities to the country.
And you said earlier, a ministry is like a corporation. You are, as a minister, you are the CEO of that ministry, that corporation. So of course, you are
and
set at a higher standard.
You have to be of you have to have, let's say, be of a good character, have high integrity. But so important, some people feel like, well, he's a nice guy, he's married, he doesn't go in clubs, he doesn't go here or there, he doesn't drink. So of course he or she will pass the screening. But then you find out that, hey, 6 years ago, they were working maybe as the director somewhere, or the CFO at a particular company. And we realized he was not working at the bank anymore. But he's a reputable guy. He has a good education. But then in the screening, you will find out that the reason why he was forced to leave the bank is because he did his own private banking within the bank. Now, you don't want that person to be a minister where they can sign off on deals in exchange for something.
Exactly.
Okay?
You're talking to a newsman, so I can draw a line to who you're referring to in that particular case, because we have had that in the recent past.
No. I wasn't
No,
referring to any.
I'm just saying that in here in Senegal, we've had a particular case in the recent past that almost fits that description. So indeed, there are circumstances where you would think that
the story that I just told is not true.
no,
If
exactly.
the name or the description fits anybody, I humbly apologize. I didn't come here to put nobody business out there. So I
But
honestly,
that's the thing about the screening here in St. Martin. Whether you pass the screening or you don't pass it, St. Martin is so small, right? That at the end of the day, within no time, you would hear through the grapevine who was a candidate minister submitted for screening and didn't pass the screening, and who did pass. So St. Martin is such a small island that you can't keep that on the wraps. And I must commend this present coalition team and all involved, that they have done a great job in keeping things under the wraps, because the minimum information that is coming out is a testament to the fact that everybody seems to be tight-lipped and keeping their mouth shut in this. So that's a good thing. But again, the question is, the screening process is not anchored in any law within our legal system, and still it is imposed upon us to undergo. Should that be, or we can say yes because we don't want anyone about to be a minister, so there have to be some type of screening going on. But if that's the case, Mr. Marlin, why is it not anchored in law?
It is not anchored in law because at the time of the first, when we prepared the Constitution and the organic laws for country St. Martin, it was done by the island territory. At the time, I came in 2009, and I sped up the process for us to become country, to finalize this in 2010, in order to avoid certain things that I wouldn't want to discuss or need to discuss at this moment. There are many things that have not been fully regulated as yet. For instance, there is a conflict with elections, general elections, and a snap election. So if, for whatever reason, you form a government that takes office in March, and that government, well, I don't want to talk about it because somebody might say, hey, he is speculating on something. When we have had coalitions...
Well, we had in the past what we call the famous Mexican standoff. So, we can use examples in the past.
In the past, we've had a government fell and parliament was dissolved. The period in which an election must be held is conflicting with the amount of days of postulation, the registration of parties, and this kind of thing. So it has always been the governor waltzing through the possibilities and the realities. Thank God for the past 4 years, we didn't have a constitutional crisis in terms of a government
Right.
dissolving parliament. But if it happens anytime soon, or let me put it this way, as long as we don't have changes to our electoral laws, we will continue having this conflict.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that's one of the
Well,
issues.
that being said,
Secondly,
again, that's a very interesting keyword, but again, that'll be also a topic for another discussion. I want to take a short commercial break and have a word from our sponsor. So that will give us a little time to catch ourselves and come back to the topic at hand,
yeah, I have to
namely
come
the
back to the
screening
screening.
process. So we're going to take a
Yeah.
short break.
The slogan of stmartinnews.com is news, views, reviews, and interviews. stmartinnews.com is always on point with editorials and opinion pieces. stmartinnews.com is the best in political analysis, court cases, and investigative reporting. We tell it like it is. stmartinnews.com is the only news site to bring the news directly to you via email. Register today at stmartinnews.com for your free subscription to the daily newsletter and read the news on your smartphone, tablet, and desktop computer. Because we do things and view things differently at stmartinnews.com, support our work and buy a year subscription for only $75 per year. stmartinnews.com for news, views, reviews, and interviews. Subscribe today. We will bring you the news faster than Facebook.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. My name is Terence Ray. I'm the host of News Café, and my guest this evening is none other than Mr. William Marlin. Goes without any further introduction. Everyone knows who William Marlin is. We were talking about the position of the Prime Minister within the government, within the Council of Ministers. We talk about the screening process. We acknowledge the role of the governor in that process. Normally, at this point in time, we would entertain and field questions from our viewers. They seem to be all under the impressed with Mr. Marlin's information. So we have no questions at this point in time. So we will continue the discussion. And I want to get to the point where the role of the formateur in the screening process. Apparently, these entities that I mentioned before, the SFE, the Tax Office, the Secret Service, and the Prosecutor's Office, they all report their findings during their screening process of a candidate minister. They report their findings to the governor, and the governor informs the formateur. And based on those findings, a decision is made whether to continue with or without that candidate minister. Of course, we're not, as public, we're not privy, nor as media, we're not privy to that screening process or the findings. We have to depend on what the formateur puts out publicly. Of course, the governor is leading that process because ultimately he has to sign off on the appointment of that candidate minister who has passed the screening. But again, we see where the formateur leading that process ultimately becomes prime minister. And because of his role in that screening process, in that formation process, he can be seen as the boss of the other ministers because he, together with the minister, signed off on the appointment. And the question is, Mr. Marlin, can a prime minister fire a minister? Because we just talked on the topic of a constitutional crisis within government where the government can sign a decree to dissolve parliament. And that normally happens when there's some type of crisis between parliament and the government, or if there's an issue with a minister's functioning and parliament wants to give that minister a vote of non-confidence, and maybe the minister or the prime minister or the council of ministers may not agree with that position of parliament to fire, as it were, a minister by giving him or her a motion of non-confidence. This results in a what we call a constitutional crisis. We've seen that happen in the past. The famous or the infamous Mexican standoff was once upon a time a big issue in our past as country, St. Martin. So the question is, can a prime minister fire a minister?
No, you can't fire who you didn't hire. Um, you don't go to the prime minister to take the oath. It's not the prime minister who approves, neither the formateur who gives the green light to someone becoming a minister. You go before the governor to take the oath. You are invited by the governor to take the oath. So it is not so that as formateur, I can have a discussion, I can have a heated discussion or debate with the prime minister over a candidate, and I can say, no, governor, you're not being, fair with this person, or so, or that information, in my opinion, uh, doesn't warrant excluding him or her, or that information is not totally correct.
And
Or
from the findings of the screening process, right?
yes, I will ask the candidate in question to clarify, let's say, this issue with the bank, or with the tax office, or
Whatever.
with
Yeah.
his loss of a job somewhere. But the prime minister cannot say, I don't like the functioning of that minister. So Wednesday in the meeting of the Council of Ministers, uh, that is not my phone ringing. That is my alarm for 9 o'clock to take
Uh-huh.
medication,
Medication. You know.
and I
Well,
have stopped.
if you, well, okay,
So,
good.
so the prime minister cannot fire any minister. The prime minister cannot even come to the Council of Ministers and say, guys, majority rules in here. I want to move that Minister X is fired in this meeting. I have an agenda point, the firing of the minister, and um, I have reasons why I would want to do so. What the minister can do, the prime minister can do, is go to the coalition
Right.
and say to the coalition, this minister is not functioning. So I have asked him or her to tender their resignation, and he or she is refusing.
Right.
Or can go to the faction leader of the prime minister's party and say, hey, listen, uh, Minister X, Y, or Z, he or she is doing a terrible job, and or is refusing to live up to the governing program, where we have clearly stated we will do X, and the minister is hell bent on going in the opposite direction. So I asked them to vacate their seat. They don't
Right.
want to. So please bring a motion of no confidence and uh, get the whole coalition to stand behind you. We have had a situation, for instance, when, interestingly, the incoming, well, not the incoming, the formateur, who is widely expected to be the prime minister,
Right.
when he was a member of parliament, uh, brought a motion of no confidence against a minister of his coalition, and gave a whole expose as to why he was not in support of the minister anymore. Because you can remember, in a previous meeting of parliament, he said, Minister, I'm telling you, this is your last warning. If you don't bend, I'm telling you, this is your last warning. Then he followed up with a motion of no confidence that was supported by 7 colleagues in opposition, and 7 in coalition voted against. And he voted, of course, for the motion, which resulted in the minister being removed. And interestingly, the minister was never replaced. The cabinet of the minister remained in office, awaiting the appointment of a new minister, who would then decide whether they would stay or not. But school children said the minister who was removed continued to manage his cabinet from remote control. I don't know if that is true. I have no evidence to substantiate that, but the cabinet stayed there. So no it is a farce or it's not true. The Prime Minister doesn't have that power. But to get back to the issue that you have
But
raised, yes,
do you
indeed.
think that should be the case, that someone should be in charge? You know, if we don't have no leadership, no
Parliament is
control
in charge. Parliament is in charge. Parliament's
on paper, in
chief
theory,
role,
but we see in the past 10 years what that
Parliament's
has.
chief role is to exercise control over the government. People believe because Parliament is co-legislator and they're members of Parliament who believe I will make a great member of Parliament if every month or every 2 months I come with a draft initiative law. No, because you have had enough draft initiative laws that came to Parliament, may have been passed, but they are like almost dead on arrival because it's the government who has to carry them out. Now, where the role of Parliament is, for instance, with the budget, government brings a budget and says, this is how I plan to collect money, and we will have a total income of 580 million guilders this year. This is how we plan on spending it. We are going to spend X for the Ministry of General Affairs, X for the Ministry of TIAT, X, totaling 578 million. So we have a surplus projected of 2 million, which in the course of the year, we may either find something to do with it or we will let that roll over or pay all debt.
Right.
Now, when you bring that budget to Parliament, that is where Parliament has the right to amend that budget. Members of Parliament can then say individual members or a group of members of Parliament, a faction or a party or two people from opposing, from different factions can come together and say, listen, we believe more money needs to go towards education, or more money should go towards sports or culture, or more money has to go to VROMI for fixing of roads, paving of roads, or for the construction of sidewalks, or for whatever the case may be. Okay, we may have an area that floods whenever there's a heavy rain because the gutters are not properly paved.
Period when indeed the ministers have, or the ministers have to bring their budget to Parliament, and Parliament has to ultimately sign off on that. That it gives the Parliament a bit of control over that process. But when you have the situation where members of Parliament are saying, that's my minister or that's my ministry, and they are my men, and they have to do what I say, isn't that where we see the process where no one basically is in control of the council ministers, and there's no boss, no leadership there, and we have members of Parliament pulling strings from Parliament saying that they are the controllers over that ministry, or they have that minister, they appoint that minister there, so he or she has to do what they want. If we have this situation in a case like this, wouldn't it be prudent to have indeed a prime minister in control of the ministers, in control of the council of ministers, and in control of government, and have that ultimate decision over the functioning of the ministers within that council of ministers, and not be subjected to the whims and the wishes of MPs in Parliament as saying or claiming that that ministry is theirs or that minister is theirs. I want to know if we have, and if you agree with me or not, if we would have the option of making the prime minister and putting that person in charge of government, and not just
no. Then we have then we have a presidential system where we elect a president, and then the president appoints his or her cabinet. Then the president would say, "This is my program. This is my government. The people of St. Martin elected me to lead this country. This is the team that I put in place to help me lead it. And if you are not playing uh, according to my rules and regulations or according to my program, then I can tell you to please leave because I'm the one who appointed you there. That is why we have in the Constitution the ability for Parliament to get rid of one or more ministers or the entire cabinet, and the Council of Ministers to get rid of the uh, 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 the Parliament, dissolve Parliament. Let me give you an example. For instance, if the Council of Ministers brings a budget or brings a law that is important for moving the country forward, okay, and the Parliament says absolutely not, that law ain't gonna fly here. And it takes one to defect with the opposition and vote against that law. And that law is important for moving things forward. What would the government then do? The government say, well, it doesn't seem like we have support in Parliament for our law. And this law is important for the governing of this government. So we're going to send Parliament home. The other way around, government can come with a proposed law that when Parliament sees the insistence of government or the minister in question who brings it, a majority in Parliament can bring a motion and say, Minister, that can't fly. And if this is what you intend to do with the country, you don't have our support anymore. This is enough. Enough is enough. You're going home. If
So let's try to, because we have run out of time, so we'd have to wrap up. Given your number of years in politics and in government here in St. Martin, what would be your personal choice in terms of a system? Would you prefer the present system as is, or would you like to see change to something quote unquote better, or maybe even have a presidential system or a system where we appoint a prime minister, or in any event, change the system? Would you prefer that based on your experience, or would you say continue as is? What is your recommendation?
One of the things I am truly sorry that we couldn't get done in the last 13 years is to reverse the system back to how it used to be in the entire Netherlands until it's how it still is. Because I have predicted it would happen. It has been happening, and my good friend Leo Friday is flying out for medical purposes tomorrow, so I'm sure he's not looking at this show now, but we have always been at the different ends of the spectrum over this. He believes this is democracy, and I'm saying it might sound democratic to you, but it's the destruction of our political parties. Leaders can no longer lead their political parties,
Correct.
and parties are no longer operating as a party. What can happen, which we see kind of happening now, is almost like becoming a trend, that a candidate can show up on a list, be placed anywhere on that list, and ends up the top vote getter and oppose the prime minister. There's a difference if someone is part of a party. And
well, tell us what it takes to change that system. What would it take to change? We know
it takes a change of our electoral law, which has to take place in a vote in Parliament. But guess what? The people who are in Parliament all the time are the people who have become the ship jumpers because, let's say, they now get power after their party leaders and their top vote getters move on, let's say, to the Council of Ministers. They get a seat. And like my wife would say, when they go to Parlatino, they hang and they become buddies and they say, you know what? or someone who's saying, I can get something out of that minister, so I'm going to send him home. But the reality is, Terrence, to get a majority vote, you need the vote of parliament. And if I ran 23 and got elected, you think I'm going to vote to change it? Because if
because indeed you need a two-third majority in parliament to change any law of that nature. That is a constitutional law, and in that sense, you need a two-third majority to change that law.
Finding a majority in parliament who will say yes is a great thing to do, while the majority usually are people who have benefited from the system.
Yes.
If you would look now, members who are coming in from several of the parties are members who were not placed. Let's say if we take all the parties that have two MPs,
Right.
okay, all the parties with the exception of
All
the
of them,
National Alliance, okay, National Alliance number 1, 2, 3, and 4 got elected.
correct.
Up got 3 seats, but number 1, 2, and 3 have not been elected. Okay, only
Oh,
number
Lord.
2. If you look at USP didn't get any seat, but the leader got outpolled by 2 candidates.
Right.
If you look at Up, number 1 got elected and number 3 got elected.
But
If
here's
you
the thing. Let's wrap it up,
look
because
at
at the end of the day, we run out of time.
no,
So
I'm saying those people who benefit from the system,
they're not going to change. They're not going to
when
vote
they
to
get
change it.
in, they're not going to necessarily vote to change it.
Right. And here's the
And
kicker.
that's the challenge we have had.
And here's the kicker for our viewers, Mr. Marlin, and I'm sure you're going to agree with me. Even if a two-third majority was found to vote for that initiative, to change that law or whatever, we still have to go to the Kingdom Council of Ministers to get ultimate approval for that change.
And I don't think the Kingdom Council of Ministers would object to reverting something to
That
how
point,
it
no.
has always been.
With that point, no. But you can
in all
imagine
the
that there may
territories
be
of the
other
kingdom.
points where they indeed will object to that change. Let's say, for instance, Parliament now decides now to raise the salaries now, and a two-third majority is for that, to raise the salaries of the MPs. I think in the case of that, the Kingdom Council of Ministers might object to that decision.
No, it is not a decision that the Kingdom Council of Ministers has to agree to. You see, what has happened with the salaries?
If now we want to secede from the kingdom now, say, I don't want to leave the kingdom now, I think that's where they will have a say in that issue.
No, they don't have a say in that either, because the UN resolution allows colonies to become independent. So any country that votes to become independent has a right, a God-given right to be independent. Every nation, people seem to be
So let me finish with that last question. Let me finish with that last one, because we have to wrap it up. What are we waiting on? If we have that right and that ability to go independent, what are we waiting on?
A decision by the majority of the people. A leader, let's say I as Prime Minister, or I as, the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers, or even the entire Parliament, cannot take a vote for St. Martin to become independent. In my farewell address, I said, just like it took a vote in a referendum for us to change our status from a member of the island territory, from the an island territory within the Netherlands Antilles. Now it would take a referendum for us to, let's say, vote to become independent. And when you vote to become independent, it doesn't mean that you vote in 2025 that you'll become independent in 2026. it is the responsibility of the Netherlands to make sure that we are properly prepared to leave. So it is not so that you will vote for independence in a referendum and somebody in Holland will mail you your independence papers the following week. There are discussions and preparations that need to take place.
Well, a famous minister, and I hear on the radio that he's been appointed Secretary General of the NATO. Prime Minister Rutte said ultimately some years ago that if we want to go dependent, it's just a phone call away. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's wrap up this show tonight.
It's a good note to end on for a continuation one of these days.
Yes, so let's wrap it up this evening. I know this evening there is a wake for our late colleague, Mr. Andrew Bishop. The wake is being held at the John Lomley Center here in Phillipsburg on the Pondfield. And I think this show would be a good memorial for him, being who he was as an active and long-lasting broadcaster in television and news. And I wish all his family and friends much strength as they go into the process of taking care of his funeral arrangements. I believe it's for tomorrow, so we'll hear shortly from them what is the status of that. But Mr. Marlin, I wish we had more time because, as you can see, we can debate and talk for hours. But unfortunately, we have a limitation on our time, and we must wrap it up. So I thank you very much.
I have a whole lot of time because all I played out is dominoes. I can't even do some of the work I had loved doing at home, like carpentry and this kind of thing, because of the condition that I am in for now, having a severe damaged cluster of nerves in L5, which was damaged during a test in Panama. So I repeat again,
you have to continue
sickness
after the show is done. But I'm sorry, I have to show now. Our time is up. We have to stop here. But on that note, I must say, reason for me to bring it back on a future show. There's so much to talk about. I might even want to have you as a co-host, but at the end of the day, we got to wrap it up right now. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for viewing our show tonight, and I will welcome the opportunity to have a continued discussion with Mr. Marlin, but we have to stop now, and wish everyone a good night, and thank you for watching.
The slogan of StMartinNews.com is news, views, reviews, and interviews. StMartinNews.com is always on point with editorials and opinion pieces. StMartinNews.com is the best in political analysis, court cases, and investigative reporting. We tell it like it is. StMartinNews.com is the only news site to bring the news directly to you via email. Register today at StMartinNews.com for your free subscription to the daily newsletter and read the news on your smartphone, tablet, and desktop computer. Because we do things and view things differently at StMartinNews.com, support our work and buy a year subscription for only $75 per year. StMartinNews.com for news, views, reviews, and interviews. Subscribe today. We will bring you the news faster than Facebook.